The hotel listing showed 2 blocks from the Sambadrome. The photos looked clean, the price felt right, the map showed metro stations nearby. Everything checked out, except the map doesn't show what happens when the last train leaves at 1 in the morning and the street empties in 17 minutes. Rio Carnival operates on a clock that tourists rarely understand until they're standing alone on a sidewalk at 2 in the morning, watching taillights disappear around a corner. The festivities don't end gradually, they collapse. One moment the street vibrates with 10,000 people moving toward the same trains and buses. The next moment, silence, just scattered plastic cups, rolling in the breeze, and the distant sound of metal gates closing. The accommodation mistake isn't about distance, it's about infrastructure timing. Visitors see proximity to parade routes as the primary variable. They miss the secondary system that determines whether that proximity matters. The synchronized departure of public transportation, private vehicles, and the human density that creates ambient safety. When those 3 elements vanish simultaneously, geography inverts. What looked close becomes isolated. What seemed convenient becomes exposed. This pattern emerged slowly as Carnival expanded from a local tradition into a global event. Through the 1980s and 90s, most visitors stayed in established tourist zones where hotels had existed for decades. Ipanema, Copacabana, Leblon, these neighborhoods possessed layered infrastructure, multiple transport routes, all-night businesses, residential density, police presence calibrated to tourist expectations. But as demand grew, accommodations spread into transitional zones, areas undergoing development, blocks where residential buildings mixed with light commercial space, streets that felt vibrant during daytime but emptied after dark. Because locals understood the rhythm, these neighborhoods weren't dangerous in the conventional sense. They simply lacked the population density and economic activity that creates eyes on the street after midnight. The trap springs at the moment of peak exhaustion. You've spent 6 hours standing in dense crowds. Your feet ache. Your phone battery hovers at 8%. The parade just ended. Everyone around you surges toward the metro entrance. You follow because following feels safe. Then you reach the platform and see the digital sign. Last train departed 4 minutes ago. Next service resumes at 5 in the morning. This is when the sorting begins. Locals immediately form groups. They know which friends have cars parked 3 blocks away. They know which bus lines still run. Skeleton service until 3. They know which taxi stands maintain overnight presence and which ones close when official events end. This knowledge wasn't learned from websites. It accumulated through years of navigating the gap between when Carnival ends and when regular city life resumes. Tourists stand in small clusters, opening ride apps, watching prices surge to 5 times normal rates. Some accept the cost, others hesitate, trying to calculate whether walking makes sense. The map shows their hotel, 13 blocks, 15 minutes on foot under normal conditions. They start walking. The first 4 blocks feel fine. There are still people, stragglers moving in various directions, vendors packing up equipment, security personnel in reflective vests. Then the density drops. The commercial frontage gives way to residential buildings with shuttered ground floors. The streetlights continue, but the ambient noise fades. Footsteps echo differently on empty pavement. A woman in her early 30s moves quickly, rolling luggage behind her. She arrived this morning, dropped her bags at the hotel, went straight to the Sambadrome. Now she's returning alone because her friends stayed at a different location. She chose this hotel specifically for proximity. The listing emphasized walkability. She didn't think about what walkable means after the crowd evaporates. Every passing vehicle makes her calculate, slow down or speed up, make eye contact or look away. Her phone's GPS shows her position as a blue dot moving along a gray line. The line looks simple. The reality includes variables the app doesn't render, parked cars that could hide movement, cross streets where sightlines compress, residential buildings where no one looks out windows because residents learned years ago that engaging with street activity after midnight creates unwanted attention. The mechanism that creates vulnerability isn't violent crime in the aggressive sense. It's opportunistic assessment. Someone standing in a doorway notices the rolling luggage, the tourist clothing, the phone held at chest level for navigation, the pace that signals unfamiliarity. These markers broadcast presence outside the protective systems that locals navigate instinctively. In other contexts, this person might pass without incident, but Carnival creates temporal distortion. The same street that hosted 50,000 people 90 minutes ago now feels post-apocalyptic. The contrast amplifies perception. Someone walking alone after the crowds vanish looks isolated in ways they wouldn't during normal evening hours. When the street maintains baseline activity, the hotel finally appears. She reaches the entrance, fumbles with the electronic key, gets inside. The lobby is empty. The night clerk sits behind reinforced glass, barely looking up. She reaches her room, locks the door, sits on the bed, safe. But the walk created an anxiety she'll carry through the rest of her trip. Tomorrow she'll spend $40 on a taxi for a distance she could walk in daylight. The convenience she paid for turns into a calculation about whether staying near the Sambadrome is worth the nightly ritual of figuring out how to get back. This pattern repeats across dozens of hotels in transitional zones, properties that market themselves on proximity, without explaining the transportation infrastructure collapse. Some hotels offer shuttle services, others partner with taxi companies to guarantee availability, but many simply take bookings, assuming visitors will figure out logistics. The assumption holds during the day, it fractures after midnight. The city's geography compounds the problem. Rio stretches along the coast in a narrow band between mountains and ocean. This creates linear transportation corridors. When those corridors shut down, lateral movement becomes difficult. A hotel 3 kilometers from the Sambadrome might require a route that loops 8 kilometers to avoid areas without maintained roads or lighting. The direct path exists on maps, but not in practice. Locals understand this intuitively because they've spent lives learning which shortcuts work after dark and which ones exist only theoretically. A visitor has no framework for distinguishing between routes that locals use and routes that appear on digital maps. But no one actually walks. The app suggests the shortest path. The shortest path crosses 4 blocks where businesses close at 10 and streetlights function intermittently, because the infrastructure upgrade hasn't reached that section yet. The aftermath of these experiences rarely makes news because nothing explicitly happens. No violence, no theft, just heightened anxiety, and the realization that proximity to carnival action matters less than connection to transportation systems that remain functional when events end. Some visitors adjust. They start leaving early, before the final parade segment concludes. They accept higher taxi costs as insurance. They join informal groups of other tourists, creating temporary safety through numbers. Others discover that their hotel lobbies become social hubs, where guests wait together until sunrise, rather than attempting solo returns. A grandfather from Portugal sits in a worn armchair, talking to a couple from Canada who made the same mistake. They'll wait until 5 when the metros restart. None of them plan to spend their night in a hotel lobby, but it beats walking through emptied streets, trying to navigate using phone maps that don't distinguish between daylight routes and post-midnight realities. The economic impact ripples through the following year's bookings. Online reviews mention the transportation issue. Future visitors adjust their searches toward established tourist zones where infrastructure runs deeper. Hotels in transitional areas begin offering transportation packages, recognizing that proximity alone isn't enough to retain customers who've learned that the last kilometer matters more than the first 20. The city itself adapts slowly. Additional bus routes, extended metro hours during peak carnival days. But the adaptation lags behind the expansion of accommodations, because infrastructure planning operates on different timescales than hotel development. A property can open in 18 months. Extending reliable public transportation to that area might require 5 years of coordination between municipal departments, budget allocation, and construction schedules. What remains is the gap, the space between where carnival happens and how visitors get home safely, between what maps show and what streets feel like when density collapses, between the promise of proximity and the reality of isolated walks through transitional neighborhoods. At 2 in the morning, Carnival creates temporary cities within the city, populations that surge and crash within hours, infrastructure designed for stable residential patterns, struggles to accommodate these pulses of movement. The result is predictable for locals and shocking for visitors who assumed that staying close meant staying safe. The real distance isn't measured in blocks. It's measured in the time between the last event and the first train, in the gap between the crowd and the empty street, in the moment when the map stops being useful and experience becomes the only guide. If stories about how cities reshape themselves around temporary events interest you, there's more waiting in the next chapter of Rio's hidden infrastructure.